Well, I'm glad we get to do this as a discussion rather than kind of the traditional sermon, because nothing right now feels like tradition fits.
Amen.
Everybody's cheese has been moved. And when you first came to me, Alex, and we talked about this, and this parable came to me, but the world was very different. And since that time, the world has become, I think, even more relevant to the story than it was. And I think a parable is also especially fitting because, back when, about the same time we all started learning professional Bible study, we were taught, and I don't know about you, but I was taught that a parable was a story with a point, one point. And so we would sit around, we would read the parable, and then we'd argue about what that one point was. And very often we couldn't agree.
Especially Presbyterians.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
But in recent years, people have gotten more comfortable with the idea of that Jesus' strategy when telling these stories was not to make a point, but to help people shift their way of thinking, shift their worldview, expand their thinking, challenge their thinking. And so that's what you have in this story about, because it's not so much the story, the point would have been, we were taught, was we have a good person, and a good person acts like this.
I think you're right. It's important for us to remember that this isn't a proverb. It's a parable. So in the proverb being a story told to make a point, make a specific moral point as a lesson, where the parable is not. As a matter of fact, Christ is using it quite differently and quite confrontationally, a point to make us actually think deeply about who we are.
Right. And a proverb, often you hear that and you say, oh, that's so true. The audience that he was telling this to would have said, how can that be true? Because just the way it's structured, the Jews of this period, the Samaritans, had a long history of not getting along. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't hang out together. To tell a story to the Jewish mind back then about somebody on the road to Jericho getting robbed, they would have assumed the Samaritans were the ones doing the robbing.
Correct.
But here, Jesus specifically sets up a story where you've got the people everyone expects to be good, the priest, the Levite, serves in the temple, not acting so good, and then the person who is assumed to be bad, not only acting good, but heroically. And so it's a story designed to kind of blow your mind. And it certainly would have been encountered that way. And if a lesson could be taken from it, from just looking at the characters, Jesus might have been suggesting, look, it's not what group you belong to. It's what you do when you're faced with a crisis or an opportunity to serve.
Well, and I agree. Parables kind of turn the world upside down. And it's amazing to me how much Jesus' parables, like you say, apply to today, because it still turns our world upside down 2,000 years later. We don't have Jews and Samaritans. We have Democrats, Republicans. We have all kinds of divisions that we create between ourselves, all kinds of tribes that we belong to, in which we ascribe the worst to the other tribes. So I agree that I think and Jesus does this all the time in the Gospels, in turning the bad guys into the good guys. Especially people who aren't part of the church are the people who are most faithful. And that's a challenge to us. And also a warning, particularly these days in which we don't turn what's happening to us in a way to divide us, rather than in a way to connect us.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that as we read the story, that we remember the parable for which it's being told and set against is the first and the second of the greatest commandments, which in Jesus' eyes, he states, are equal. To love the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your spirit, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's, I think, one of the key points is Christ uses self quite a bit when he actually is speaking and teaching. He's trying to get individuals to stop looking at the outer and look inside. And first you have to love yourself. And if you're loving yourself, then you have the ability to love your neighbor. And then through that love, you are automatically worshiping and loving God.
I like the point about that part of Jesus. It seems like what he's speaking to here is that tribalism, and that sense of we know we're supposed to be loving each other as ourselves, but we tend to be selective about who the good groups are and who the bad people are.
Well, the good groups look like me, and the bad groups look like someone else.
That's right.
Or the good groups think like me, and the bad groups think like somebody else.
I'm just glad he's not pointing at me.
I might do that.
But it's actually another feature of this story, the way Jesus has told it. There's this road from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's about 18 miles. It's through the desert. It's known to have crime, lots of places for bad people to hide, to rob you. But it's interesting that the man setting out on the journey, the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan are all on the same road. And to me, that speaks to the moment that we're in. Because despite the tribalism, despite the political differences, despite all this stuff, we have been thrown into a reality where we are all in this together. In a way that nothing like this has ever happened during my lifetime that I can think of. And so, what does God have to say about that reality, or at least this moment educating us? Because we're all having to relearn things. And this is a pretty foundational thing to learn, is that we all have to be for all of us. We all need to be taken care of, all of us.
And it's even more, it's larger than just Heartland and Clive and Des Moines and Salem and Ullman, Iowa. It's the nation as a whole, the state as a whole, the world truly as a whole, coming together on the same road, facing the same issue.
Yeah. And so then I guess to get back to this emphasis about the sick, my first thought is we have maybe different levels of symptoms, but our world is sick. And that's just part of our new reality. But there's this idea that we were talking about in the Matthew text, that our charge is to visit the sick. And in doing a little bit of study on that word there, the sense of visit is more than just physically going and being present to somebody, but the word also includes this idea of looking out for the sick. So that our job is maybe not strictly limited to calling on people we like or calling on the people that we're supposed to call on, but actually, how is it that we can look out for people when, and this is the hard part of our reality right now, we're not actually supposed to be around each other. We're sitting distant apart to take care of each other. But how do we do that?
Yeah, well, that's been probably one of the most significant struggles for me as this has been going on, in part because everything in me as a pastor, as a Christian, everything theologically, spiritually, emotionally, is to take care of the command, take care, visit the sick, to look out for those who are sick. But the best way the tension, the paradox, the best way to look out for them right now is to stay home. And that's been a real struggle for me, because I do think that's true. The way to look out for each other in many ways right now is to stay separated. So that has been a tension within that text for me as well.
And I think that's a larger tension for all of us. I know I share the exact same for all of you who know me and who are getting to know me. I am a relational minister, pastor. I am sitting here in conversation, connected to you, face to face. I'm a huggy guy. That's my personality, and this is all counter to who I am and who I want to be in ministry. So it's a rediscovery. It's a rediscovery of, okay, how can I be a new minister? How can I change and still do ministry, but do it from my office?
Well, so I guess to wrap up what we've been discussing, after thinking about this parable the last couple of weeks, I'm really struck by Jesus' strategy of, instead of trying to drive a point home, stick it in somebody's face, the strategy is to change our way of thinking. That's what this story does. It challenges the way we think about how we are to be with people that we normally don't get along with. So we're challenged on that front. We're challenged with this reality that all of us, without regard to our color, sex,
Creed,
political orientation at all, we're in this together. And so, what is our response to that challenge? And then just how do we go about looking out for each other? How can we be creative in being for people, being present with people without being physically present? How do we look out for each other? And this, I think, is the essence of the justice message, which is God has done incredible things for us. We have experienced grace. So we are here to extend that grace back to all our neighbors.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that strikes me about being able to quarantine is, in a sense, is the privilege of being able to do that. And knowing that, particularly in the text of Matthew 25, the least of these, those most vulnerable, the homeless, the food insecure, I'm struggling to find ways. How do I look after them? And sharing resources among church members. How do we continue to look after them? Which might be a cash donation to Cross Outreach, or a cash donation to Des Moines Area Religious Council, or to some food pantry. It might mean actually literally checking on your next door neighbor to make sure they have food, particularly if they're older members and more limited in being able to go out and buy groceries. I think if there's good news, and I appreciate you lifting up this gift of God's grace, if there's good news, it's that we will learn and connect in more profound ways in caring for each other and looking after each other, eliminating as much as possible these ways of being disconnected. That's the good news for me.
Amen. I agree. I think it's all about letting the Spirit guide us and teach us through this moment. Scott mentioned before we sat down and started that a new way of being means that we have to come under the presence of knowledge and learning and opening ourselves to new experiences, and not saying, well, that won't work, but going, maybe we can give it a try. Be creative. I will tell you that I have a 3-year-old next door that's creative. She posted a big sign in the window that faces our house that said, "Hi, Leanne and Scott." My wife is Leanne. And so my wife and I went and got a poster board, and we wrote a hello back to her. New ways of being neighbors in community. And again, like Alex said, check on your neighbor. Salem is a little different community because it's rural, and they're already neighbors but separated. where a lot of people in the city, we think of multiple communities. We have our work community, we have our faith community, we have our bowling community, we have our friend group that we go and do things with. That's changed. Now our community is our immediate neighbors. They is the individuals we have the ability to interact with. And it's those people that it's our family that we have to watch and safeguard. Scott, to your first point about being together in the world, there was an interview of a medical scientist yesterday. And he was asked a specific question: do you see your work as the work of the new arms race? In other words, similar to the Red Scare and all the rest of it. And
as if it's a competition.
As if it's a competition.
Between countries and divisions and tribes.
Exactly. Good one. And his answer, almost brought tears to my eyes when I heard it. Because he went, well, perhaps in a way, but in a positive. We're not working against fellow human beings. We're working together as a world to defeat a common enemy for humanity. And how, talk about bringing that together and all being on the same road as to your message. That's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah, I like that. So to finish up, Heartland Church has T-shirts which has a saying on it, which is, the church has left the building. And the challenge for Heartland, for UCC Salem, for all of us who are the church, is living out that truth, that we're not church simply because we gather in this particular building, but we are church connected out there in the world doing meaningful things. So that's our challenge in the coming weeks, and I encourage us all to be the church that has left the building.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.